Hello everybody, welcome back. We are doing another 5-video series on a book. Why 5 videos? Because I like it, because that's how it started, and a pattern's a hard thing to break. If we need to do more, we'll do more. But anyway, we are going to start working on a classic, a great book, a really good one. You know it, you love it. Bam! 1984 by George Orwell. Why do I want to talk about 1984? Well, to explain that, let me tell you a little story. Now, I know some people, your childhood memories, have really great childhood memories and very clear childhood memories, right? They can vividly remember specific places and people and times and what things were said and what things were done. I don't have those kinds of childhood memories. Most of my memories just sort of fade into the gray mist of time. Why? I don't know. They just do. But I do have one memory that involves this, sort of. So, in 1984, I was 10 years old, and oh, why thank you, you're right, I don't look old enough. That's very kind of you. But anyway, I was 10 years old, and my friend and I, at the time, had this tradition of, on New Year's Eve, we would go to each other's houses. We would swap every year. And on New Year's Eve, 1984, I had heard of the book, and I'd heard of George Orwell. I hadn't read it, of course, because I was 10. But for some reason, I got it in my head that George Orwell had predicted the end of the world in 1984, and that's what the book was about. Wrong, I know, but still. So there we are, it's New Year's Eve, we're watching the countdown on TV, there's Times Square, there's Dick Clark, and we count down from 10, and it's all great, and then when the clock ticks over, and it is no longer 1984, it is now 1985, I let out a sigh of relief, because I thought, oh, the world is still here. George Orwell was wrong. Now, why am I telling you that story? Mainly because, not because it was a clever thing. I was a kid, I didn't know anything. But kind of to point out how deeply this book gets ingrained into our sort of cultural understanding. Even though I had never read the book, even though I was only 10 years old, somehow this thing got into my head. And I knew George Orwell, I knew 1984, I knew it wasn't a happy book, even if I got the point wrong. But yeah. It's huge. It looms large in the landscape of English literature. So I think that alone makes it good to talk about. But basically, I really enjoy it. I've taught it a few times. I've read it plenty of times. And I like it a lot. So one small caveat that occurs to me is that the book has been done a lot, right? People have been writing about this book now for decades. I don't think I am going to uncover any hidden truths in this series that haven't already been discussed. I don't think I'm really going to break any new ground here. And that's okay. That's not what these videos are for, right? We're not here doing our master's degree. The reason I do these videos is because I like reading and I like talking about the books that I read. So hopefully I'll be able to come up with stuff that is interesting. But, if you're expecting me to shed brand new light on George Orwell that's never been shed before, that's not really what this is about. Maybe someday. Maybe someday. But anyway, what do I want to talk about when I talk about this book? Well, first of all, I want to talk about language, because I think language is central to understanding what Orwell is trying to talk about in terms of his warnings about totalitarianism, about the ways in which we can kind of fool ourselves, right? And it's so important that right in the end of the book, there is an appendix. It's called The Principles of Newspeak. If you've read the book before, but then you got to the very end, that Winston loved Big Brother, and then you said, well, story's done. You really need to go back and read Principles of Newspeak, because it lays out a lot of this idea of what the party is doing and how the party is using language to control people. And I think it is fascinating. But even Orwell as a writer does some neat little language tricks that I like too. One of them, for example, is the very first line of the book. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. Now, I like that opening line because for most of that sentence, we're great, we're cool, we're rolling along with it. Everything seems to make sense. And then we get to that last word, 13, and I think some little gears in my brain kind of lock up because clocks aren't supposed to strike 13. That doesn't make any sense. And then you think, okay, well, they use 24-hour time, right? Military time. I use 24-hour time all the time. But nevertheless, does that mean the clocks actually strike 13 times? And then by inference, do they eventually strike 24 times? That's crazy. That's a lot of times. And you just find yourself lingering on that first sentence. Something about that first sentence bothers you. And I think that's Orwell, who's definitely trying to make us uneasy from the very, very beginning of the book. And you keep reading that paragraph, and he's definitely giving us a bleak and miserable landscape. But that first sentence tells us that something is definitely not right here. And it just goes on from there. So I really like it. So I think language is something we have to talk about. We definitely have to talk about Winston Smith. A lot of times in dystopian literature, certainly, but anytime you have sort of the people against a terrible government, these days especially, we have a young, maybe handsome, strong, gifted hero whose job is to be the face of the revolution and to stop the bad guy and overthrow the government, right? We've seen those movies. We know what they're like. But Winston Smith isn't that guy. Winston Smith is a middle-aged, let's call him writer, who is physically unfit. He's got varicose veins. He can't touch his toes. He's not very healthy. He's not very handsome. He's none of those things. So I want to talk about sort of why Orwell made him the way he did. Nevertheless, Winston is he's our hero. He's our protagonist, the person we see all this through. He begins the book with an active thoughts crime, right? By writing down his own thoughts in a journal. You're not supposed to have your own thoughts in Oceania. The party tells you what your thoughts are, and you have to have those thoughts. That's all there is to it. But he ends up kind of finding his way, trying to figure out the truth of the party and the truth of history. And he meets this woman, Julia, who might be in it to overthrow the party, might just be in it for the sex. They meet O'Brien, who's a member of the inner party, who they think they can trust, and they find themselves in a situation where they might be working to overthrow this gargantuan political, economic complex. And they know they're not going to do it in their lifetime, but maybe the next lifetime of the generation after that will do it. And then they get caught, and they get broken. And that's it. You read it, and you're like, everything that Winston went through was for nothing. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the choices that Orwell made in bringing Winston Smith to life and telling us sort of why that needed to be the character he needed to tell this story. Again, one of the things that I like to talk about, especially when I'm talking to my students about writing and about writers' choices, is why did the writer choose this and not absolutely anything else? Why didn't Orwell choose to make Winston Smith a dashing hero? He could have. Orwell could have done that. He chose not to. So I'm interested in that. And of course, I want to talk about the superstate of Oceania. I majored in political science in university, so I do enjoy the politics of this book. I want to talk about sort of the three superstates, of course, sort of modeled off of the dual superstates of post-World War II, and how those are set up, how they're depicted. We never get to see points of view from the other two superstates. We only see Oceania's point of view. But I'm interested in the system that Orwell has thought up amongst these three superstates, and potentially what might be the truth of these particular systems. What might be the truth of Oceania? I have theories. Ooh, I have theories, my friends, about what Oceania is. I want to talk about how the party surveils people, how in this world you are seen everywhere. There are view screens everywhere. There's cameras everywhere. And what's more, people know that they're being surveilled. And you behave differently when you know somebody's watching you, right? And especially in a state where every, a twitch of the eye or a change in your posture might be enough to get the thought police to come and just take you away to the Ministry of Love and you're never seen again. I want to talk about that, and especially why that might have been scary for Orwell or for people of 1949. For whom they had a very reasonable expectation of privacy. And then we look at today, in the 2020s, where we put our lives out for everybody to see. We choose to participate in the grand panopticon that is the internet, and we invite people into our minds, and we tell people what we're thinking about. I mean, that's what all this is, right? Yeah, so I sometimes wonder what Orwell would think about ourselves, putting ourselves on display like this, when he clearly made that a source of horror in 1984. I want to talk about the party and the inner and outer party and the politics of all that. So yeah. And of course, in the end, we kind of come back to where we started and say, why read this book? Why is this book important? A lot of books were probably published in 1949. Tons of them. I imagine very few have survived. Probably a lot of them, they sold all their copies. They were never reprinted. They're gone, right? We're not going to read them again. But this book sticks with us. This book keeps coming back. It keeps showing up in our English reading lists. So why is that? What is it about this book that keeps bringing us back? Why are we so connected to it? Why are we always able to somehow find meaning in this book that relates to ourselves and to our lives as they are? So that's a whole lot of stuff. I may break 5 videos. I don't know. We'll see what we can do. Yeah, that's the kind of things I want to talk about. I hope if you've read the book and you enjoy it, if you've read the book and you're an expert in the book, that's even better. Please feel free to chime in. I would love to hear what you think, and maybe to do a little bit of response, maybe a little bit of a comment response video on 1984. That'd be great. If you haven't read the book, you really should. It's very, very good. If you're a student reading the book, I think you need to study the book, and it's worth studying, and we'll talk about why. So I think that's it for this video. In the next video, I think we'll go on to talk about language and doublethink and how Orwell uses language to his benefit in the book to make Oceania a truly terrible place. So thanks very much, and I will see you next time.